The security guard laughed at me. Not a mean laugh. A friendly one, which somehow made it worse. I had just told him I was there to see my wife, the president of the bank, and that I was her husband. And this man, who had worked that marble lobby for 6 years, chuckled like I had told a pretty good joke and said, "Sir, I see her husband every day. Matter of fact, there he goes right now." And I turned around, and a tall man in a charcoal suit was walking out through the glass doors of my wife's bank, and the guard waved at him, and the man waved back, easy as Sunday. So I did something I still have trouble explaining. I smiled. I shook that man's hand. I introduced myself with a name that was not mine. And 5 months later, in a conference room full of state banking examiners, the thing that finally ended everything for the two of them was a single signature with my name on it. A signature I never wrote. I want to tell you the whole thing, from the marble lobby to that conference room, because what saved me is something you can do yourself, tonight, for free, and by the end of this story, you will know exactly what it is. First, since you are here, do me the kindness folks have been doing me for a while now. Put in the comments what city you are listening from and what time it is there. I read every one of them with my morning coffee, and it does an old man good to know how far a voice can travel. And if you have not subscribed yet, go on and do it now, because I am going to earn it. My name is Roy Tillman. I am 61 years old, and I live outside Grand Rapids, Michigan, close enough to Lake Michigan that the gulls come inland when the weather turns. For 38 years, I worked as an insurance claims adjuster. If you are not sure what that is, I will tell you what it really is. I was the fellow who showed up after the fire, after the crash, after the water heater let go, and my job was to figure out what actually happened, as opposed to what the paperwork said happened. Those are usually two different stories. I spent 4 decades photographing scenes, building timelines, and comparing signatures, and I will tell you a secret from that trade. Honest people are inconsistent in small ways, because life is inconsistent. Liars are consistent in ways life never is. I once denied a house fire claim because of a toaster that was too clean. That is the kind of man I am. And my wife used to say it with affection. And then, for a while, she said it another way. My first supervisor, a leathery old fellow named Gus, taught me something my second week on the job that I want you to remember, because this whole story swings on it. He looked at my signature on a report, all loops and flourish, a young man's signature, and he said, "Son, simplify that. A plain signature is the hardest one to fake convincingly because there is nowhere for a forger to hide. From that day to this one, I have signed my name Roy Tillman. 2 words, no middle initial, not once in 38 years. Not on a mortgage, not on a birthday card. Hold on to that. It matters more than anything else in this story. I married Diane in the spring of 1993, when I was 28 and she was a teller at a little community bank with a drive-through window and a jar of dog biscuits for the customers' dogs. 33 years. We never had children. It was a grief for a while, and then it became a shape our life grew around, the way a tree grows around a fence wire. Diane climbed. Teller to loan officer to branch manager, and about 9 years ago, president of Kettle Creek Savings, a community bank with 4 branches and a 100-year-old name that people around here trust the way they trust the lake to be cold. I was proud of her. I want that on the record, because of everything that comes later. I was proud of her every single rung. We had an arrangement, the way long marriages do. She ran the bank and I ran the house. She handled the ambition and I handled the gutters. She would come home late and I would have dinner warm, and she would tell me about her day, and somewhere in the last few years her stories filled up with one name, Craig. Craig closed the Hendricks deal. Craig thinks we should expand the lending side. Craig, my chief lending officer, always in a business voice, always in passing. I never once flinched at it. Why would I? I had spent my career catching strangers in lies. I had never spent 1 minute of it watching my own kitchen table. 2 years ago I took the early retirement package, and I will be honest with you, I think that is when the ground started moving, and I did not feel it, because I was busy learning to make bread and joining the walking club at church. Last spring I flew to Toledo for 3 days for my cousin Walt's funeral. Remember Toledo. Like the signature, it matters. Now, the lobby. It was a Thursday at the end of September, and Diane had left that morning without her travel mug, which in 33 years had happened maybe 5 times. I decided to bring it to her at the main branch downtown, along with a sandwich, because that is the kind of husband I am, or was, and I parked in visitor parking and walked into that marble lobby feeling slightly foolish, the way a man feels visiting his wife's important world in his hardware store jacket. The guard at the desk was a wide, friendly fellow named Dennis, mid-50s, with a lunchbox on the shelf behind him, and while he was finding my name on his screen, he said, half to himself, "My mother still packs this lunch. Can you believe that?" 79 years old. I said it looked like a good lunch, and then I told him who I was, and Dennis looked up, and his face did something complicated, and he laughed that friendly laugh and said the sentence that cut my life in half. "Sir, I see your husband every day. There he goes right now." The man walking out was in his 40s, charcoal suit, good shoes, the kind of confident that fills a room before he does. Dennis called after him, "Have a good one, Mr. Mercer," and the man raised a hand without turning around, the wave of a man who belongs somewhere, and pushed out into the September light. Craig Mercer. Craig from the dinner table stories. And Dennis, honest, cheerful Dennis, was looking at me now with real confusion, because to him, I was the puzzle. He said, gently, like a man talking to somebody's lost grandfather, "Are you sure you have the right bank, sir? Mrs. Tillman's husband comes in most days, brings her coffee. They walk out to lunch together. Everybody knows him." I want to describe what happened inside me in that moment, because I have thought about it for a year. There was a roaring in my ears, and under the roaring, very quiet, very calm, a voice I knew well. It was my work voice, the voice that used to say, "Do not touch anything. Photograph the scene. Let the liar keep talking." 38 years of habit reached up and took the wheel. I smiled at Dennis and said, "No, my mistake. I am her cousin Roy, in town for the day. I will just leave these at the desk." And right then the glass doors opened and Craig Mercer came back in, keys in hand, having forgotten something, and passed within 3 feet of me, and Dennis, wanting to be helpful, said, "Mr. Mercer, this gentleman is Mrs. Tillman's cousin." And Craig Mercer stopped and looked at me, and here is the thing I will carry to my grave. He knew. I watched it cross his eyes like a cloud crossing water. He knew exactly who I was, and he decided, in half a second, to play along, the same as me. He put out his hand and said, "Great to meet you, any family of Diane's." And I shook the hand of the man who was pretending to be me, and he did not blink, and neither did I, and that half second was the whole war, declared in a marble lobby with neither of us raising our voice. I do not remember driving home. I remember sitting in my truck in our driveway, looking at the house we had paid off 6 years ago, the house I had reshingled with my own hands, and my phone buzzed, and it was Diane. "Running late tonight. Board prep. Do not wait up. Love you. Love you." I sat there and read those 2 words, maybe 40 times. And then the work voice said, plainly, "We do not react. We document." And I went inside and got a fresh legal pad, and at the top of the first page, out of 40 years of habit, I wrote the date, and under it I wrote, "Claim opened." She got home at 9:40. Heels on the tile, keys in the bowl, the sounds of 33 years. She looked tired and lovely and exactly like my wife. I said, "I came by the branch today, brought your mug." And there it was. A pause. Half a second. No more. The length of a drop stitch. Then, "Oh no, did you? I was buried in meetings. Who did you leave it with?" "The desk," I said. Another half second. You have to understand something about half seconds. To most people, they are nothing. To me, they were my profession. Insurance fraud lives and dies inside half seconds. She poured her wine with a perfectly steady hand, and she turned her watch on her wrist, around and around, the little habit she had at the dinner table whenever she was working a problem in her head, and she smiled at me and said it was sweet of me to come, and we watched the news, and she fell asleep beside me at 11, breathing slow and easy, and I lay there in the dark, understanding that I was sharing a bed with the best liar I had met in 38 years of meeting liars for a living. The next morning I did what I know how to do. I built a timeline. Quietly, methodically, the way I built 1,000 of them. I pulled the last 6 months of our joint card statements, which I had always skimmed and never studied, because trust is a kind of skimming. Lunches on days she said she ate at her desk. Gas purchases out toward the lakeshore, 30 miles off any route she had reason to drive. A charge at a furniture outlet in Muskegon on a Tuesday she had described to me, in detail, as wall-to-wall meetings. None of it was proof of anything. All of it was what we called in my trade pattern smoke. And where there is pattern smoke, you stop looking at receipts and you go look at the big documents. So that night, while my wife slept upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, and I did the thing I want every single person listening to me to do this week. I pulled my credit report. There is one official place to get it. It is free. Every American is entitled to it. No card number, no catch, and anything on this earth with your name and your credit attached to it will be on that report whether you signed it or not. It took me 11 minutes. And there, between a card I knew and a truck loan I had paid off, was a line I had never seen before, a home equity line of credit, opened in April, against our house, our paid-off house, $150,000, and according to the report, $142,000 of it already drawn. The lender was Kettle Creek Savings, my wife's bank. I sat very still for a long time. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere upstairs, the woman I had loved for 33 years turned over in her sleep, and I wrote on the legal pad, in block letters, the words that changed the whole nature of the file. Not infidelity, fraud. Here is where being an old claims man stopped being a personality flaw and started being a rescue. A loan against a house gets recorded. Mortgages, liens, equity lines, they are public record, filed at the county register of deeds, and any citizen can walk in and ask for copies. And Monday morning I was the first citizen through the door. The clerk pulled the file for a few dollars in copy fees, and there it was. A home equity agreement, my address, my wife's signature, true and genuine. I knew every hill and valley of that signature. And beside it, my signature. Except it was not. Roy E. Tillman, it said, with a proud little middle initial, signed in loops I abandoned when Gus was still alive to scold me for them. Whoever forged my name did their homework on everything except the one rule Gus taught me in 1987. I have never signed my middle initial in my life. A plain signature is the hardest one to fake, because there is nowhere to hide. And this forger, bless him, had gone looking for somewhere to hide. 3 seconds. That is how long it took me to know. And then I looked at the notarization, because a document like that has to be notarized, and a notary is required to keep a journal, a logbook of who signed, on what date, with what identification. The notary was a mobile fellow 2 counties over, and the date sworn on that acknowledgement was the 3rd week of April. I stood at the counter of the Register of Deeds, and I laughed, one short bark, loud enough that the clerk looked up. The 3rd week of April I was in Toledo, Ohio, burying my cousin Walt. I had the boarding passes in my email. I had photographs from the funeral lunch with a date stamp. My alibi for the crime committed against me had been sitting in my phone the whole time, next to pictures of a casserole table. Gus used to say the crooked file always carries its own confession. You just have to read every page. He was right for 40 years, and he was right now. The condo I found the same way the man in every story like mine finds it, which ought to tell you something about how careless the comfortable get. A key. Brass, unfamiliar, in the junk drawer under the takeout menus, on a little plastic fob from a property management outfit in Spring Lake. I drove out on a Wednesday when her calendar said Lansing. Small complex near the water. The kind of place realtors call a retreat. I am not proud of using the key, and I have decided to be honest with you, rather than comfortable. The door opened on a furnished life. Her reading glasses, the spare pair I had hunted the house for in July, a man's golf bag, 2 mugs in the drying rack, and on the mantel, framed, my wife and Craig Mercer on a boat, her head against his shoulder, her left hand bare. I did not sit down, I did not touch. I photographed everything twice with the date showing room by room, steady as a man doing inventory. And it was the hardest professional discipline of my life, because at a fire scene the thing that burned was never my own name. In a desk drawer there was a folder, and inside the folder was the part I had not let myself imagine. Printouts from a divorce consultation, months old. A strategy memo. Words like unequal earning capacity and diminished financial engagement. And a line, typed calm as a recipe, noting that the husband had become forgetful with household finances and had recently executed documents he did not recall, establishing a pattern that would be useful. Executed documents he did not recall. They had not just forged my name in April, they had already written the story they would tell about it. The story where I signed and forgot because I was old and fading and could not be trusted with my own affairs. Standing in that condo that my own house had been mortgaged to help pay for, I finally understood the whole shape of the thing, and I said out loud, to nobody, well, now this is a claim I know how to work, but I am a careful man, and careful men check the motive before they close the file, because a forgery needs a why, and the why turned out to be simple and old as money itself. I had coffee that Sunday after church with Herb Dahl. Herb is 74 and spent his career as a bank examiner for the state, and I laid it out for him as a hypothetical, and Herb is too old and too smart to believe in hypotheticals, but he honored the format. I said, suppose a chief lending officer at a small bank had personally guaranteed a bundle of vacation rentals that went bad. Herb stirred his coffee and said, how bad? I said, suppose 340,000, with a balloon note coming due. And suppose the state had already scheduled its regular examination of that bank inside the same 4 months. Herb set the spoon down and looked out the window at the parking lot for a while. Then he said the sentence I later heard, read almost word for word, into a very quiet conference room. A bank officer approving a loan he personally benefits from is not a shortcut. It is the fastest way I know to end 2 careers with 1 signature. Then he looked at me, and he stopped pretending, and he said, Roy, whose signature? And I said, mine. And Herb, who examined banks for 40 years, closed his eyes like a man hearing a hymn he hated, and said, and the president. I said I did not know how deep. Herb said, son, nobody hides an insider loan at a 4-branch bank from a president who does not want it hidden. And that was the last hope I had, put down gentle as a sick animal. She was not deceived. She was the umbrella the whole thing was standing under. Later I would learn the last piece from the settlement file, the piece that made it human instead of just criminal. 2 years ago, before there was a condo, back when it was still just ambition and admiration, Diane had quietly co-signed a piece of Craig's first Lakeshore deal. When it soured, she was in it. And people do not leap into a hole, I have learned. They step down into it, one reasonable step at a time, and by the time they look up, the sky is a little blue coin, and the man they married is standing at the edge of it holding a legal pad. I chose Saturday morning, same as every man in every kitchen, in every story like this one, because Saturday morning is when the performance is thickest. She was at the island in her yellow robe with her coffee and her phone, and the light was good, and it looked like 33 years of my life, and I put the folder on the granite between us and said, we need to talk. She looked at the folder, and then at me, and I watched the wife leave her face the way tide leaves a flat, gradually and then all at once, and what remained was the bank president. She turned her watch on her wrist, once, twice, and she said, calm as a Monday meeting, how much do you know? Not what is this? Not honey. How much do you know? I opened the folder and set the first page in front of her, and it was my credit report with 1 line flagged in yellow, and I said, I know about the April line of credit on this house. She said, Roy, there is context. I said, I have not gotten to the good part. I laid down the second set, the certified copies from the Register of Deeds, the signature page with Roy E. Tillman in somebody else's loops. Beside it, the page from the Notary Journal. Beside that, my boarding passes to Toledo, and a photograph of me at Walt's funeral lunch, date in the corner, holding a paper plate. I said 5 sentences, quiet, the way I used to close a file across a desk. 38 years, Diane. I compared signatures for 38 years. I have never once signed my middle initial, and you are the only person alive who knows that and forgot it. And on the day this was sworn, I was at a funeral in Ohio. Her hand went still on her wrist. The watch stopped turning. In 33 years, I had never seen that hand go still, and that stillness told me more than a confession, because it was not grief. It was arithmetic. She was not looking at her husband. She was counting exits. I am going to stop right here for 1 moment and speak straight to you. because this is the reason I sat down in front of this microphone at all. If you own anything, if you have ever signed anything, pull your credit report this week. It is free. It is yours by law, and it would have been the only warning I ever got months earlier if I had known to look. Do it for yourself. Do it for your mother. Do it for the neighbor who trusts everyone. And if this story is worth that one piece of paper to you, share it with somebody who needs it and subscribe, because you need to hear how it ended. Diane took a breath and started building, because builders build, and she said we could unwind it quietly, internally, no need for anything public. The line could be paid down. Mistakes were made under pressure. And I said the last thing I had, the thing she did not know I had. I said, the balloon on Craig's guarantees is $340,000, and the state examination starts the second week of November, and you co-signed his first deal 2 years ago, which is why you could not let him drown without going under the boat yourself. And my wife looked at me then, really looked, for the first time in, I do not know how long, and she said, in a voice I had not heard since she was a teller with dog biscuits in a jar, when did you find out? And I said, in the lobby 5 weeks ago. I shook his hand, and she closed her eyes, and she said, oh, Roy. And for 1/2 of 1 second, there she was, the girl from 1993, drowning inside the president, and then the president pulled her back under, and the eyes opened dry. She asked what I wanted. I said, I want nothing from you. What happens now goes to people whose job it is. And I picked up my folder, because I had made copies of everything, twice, with dates, and I left her sitting in the good Saturday light with her cold coffee and her still watch, and that was the true end of my marriage, though the paperwork took until spring. Monday I sat with Patricia Neeland, a family lawyer with gray hair and a handshake like a door latch. And she went through my folder page by page without a single wasted word. And when she finished, she took off her glasses and said, Mr. Tillman, in 30 years nobody has ever brought me a file this clean. What did you do for a living? I told her. She laughed once and said it figured. Then she told me 2 things. First, that Michigan courts have a word for marital money spent on an affair, dissipation, and that a judge can order every dollar of it accounted for and paid back out of the other side's share. Write that word down, she said, and tell your friends it exists, because half of them will need it and none of them have heard of it. And second, she said, the forgery is not a divorce matter, it is a crime and a banking matter, and it needs to go where it will do the most good, in the right order, before anyone has time to refinance the evidence. So that week, on Patricia's clock, 3 envelopes went out. 1 to the circuit court, 1, through her, to the county prosecutor, and 1 I delivered myself, in person, to a man named Sam Aldrich, who has sold tractors in this county for 40 years and who chairs the board of Kettle Creek Savings. I sat in Sam's office above the dealership, and I gave him only the banking facts. No marriage, no condo, just the loan, the approval trail, the signature, the journal, and Toledo, and Sam Aldrich got very quiet and very red, and at the end he said, Roy, my father kept his money at this bank through the Depression, and then he picked up the phone, and I will say this for tractor men, they do not form committees. The state examiners moved their visit up. I was in the building one of those days, giving my statement, and through the glass wall of a conference room, I could see Craig Mercer at the long table, and I could not hear him, but a fellow who was in the room told me afterward that he opened his answer to the first hard question with, great question, and the second. And the third time he said great question, there was no answer behind it at all, just the phrase, standing alone in the room like a man who has missed the last bus. I will keep the aftermath short, because real consequences are quieter than television. Craig Mercer was terminated before Thanksgiving, and the matters found in the examination were referred onward, and that process grinds slow, and is grinding still, and I have made my peace with slow. Diane resigned in December, 1 paragraph, before the board could meet about her, and the local paper called it a retirement, and I did not call the paper to correct it, because the truth does not need me for a press agent. The divorce settled in March. Dissipation turned out to be exactly the word Patricia promised it was. I kept the house, free and clear again, the equity line unwound and charged, with its interest, against their side of the ledger, and I signed the final agreement in front of a notary, plain, 2 words, No initial, and I watched her write my name in her journal, and I confess I looked at that logbook with real affection. Diane called me once, in May, from a number I did not know. She did not ask to come back, and she did not cry. She asked one question. She said, "At the lobby, that day, when you shook his hand, how did you do it? How did you stand there?" And I told her the truth. I said, 38 years of practice at the scene of other people's fires. I just never thought I would work my own. She was quiet a moment, and then she said, "For whatever it is worth now, the man who reshingled that roof was never once the man in those memos. We knew what we were writing was false when we wrote it. That is the only apology I got, and I have decided it is enough, because it was the only thing she had left that was true. So here is where I am, and here are the 3 pictures I will leave you with, in the order they happened. The first is a June morning on my back porch, 2 cups of coffee, one of them for Eileen, a widow from the church walking club who thinks a man who is content with a quiet life is a find and not a flaw, and who laughed until she wiped her eyes the first time I told her about the toaster. The second is a Tuesday at the senior center, where Eileen and I now run a little session on the first week of every month. We call it Read It Before You Sign It. I stand up with my 1 page of notes, and I teach 3 things and only 3. Pull your free credit report, once a year, no exceptions. Know that every notary keeps a journal, and that journal is yours to question. And know the word dissipation, and God willing may you never need it. The first slide I show is a photograph of a marble lobby. I let it sit there a minute before I say a word. The room always goes quiet. Everybody in that room has a lobby of their own somewhere, or they will. And the third picture is a letter. Last summer I finally wrote to Dennis, the guard, care of the bank, because that man told me the truth without ever knowing he was doing it, laughed the truth right into my life, and I felt he ought to know what his half a minute of honesty had set loose. And I thanked him for it, and at the bottom, because by then it was habit, I added my 3 things. Pull the report, check the journal, read before you sign. Months went by. Then in September an envelope came back, careful handwriting, and Dennis wrote that my letter had sat on his kitchen counter for a week, and one night after his shift he thought, well, it is free, and he sat down with his 79-year-old mother, the one who still packs his lunch, and they pulled her credit report together. And there on the second page they found 2 accounts she had never opened. A scam already drinking from her savings, months from taking everything she had. And they caught it in time, and closed it down, and got her money back. The man whose 1 honest sentence saved my house wrote to tell me that my 1 thank you note had saved his mother's. He ended the letter, "Tell your people at that senior center it works." So I am telling you, which is bigger than a senior center, and I hope somewhere he knows it. I do not lie awake angry anymore. I lie awake grateful, some nights, for strange arithmetic, a guard's laugh, a dead supervisor's rule about a plain signature, a funeral in Toledo that put me 200 miles from a pen I never held. It turns out a life spent paying attention was not a small life after all. It was training. So here is the end of it, plain as I can make it. If something in your house does not add up, believe the arithmetic before you believe the explanation. Pull your credit report this week. It is free, and it is yours. Read every page before you sign, and make anyone who rushes you wait, because the people who love you can wait a day, and the people rushing you have just told you why. Tell me in the comments who told you a truth once without knowing they were telling it, because I read every one. Take care of yourselves out there, keep your signature plain, and be kind to the man at the front desk. You never know whose life he is holding in his small talk.